The Wind Whisperer. The dust devil kicked up near the barn just as Ezra Whitmore was finishing his evening chores. He paused, pitchfork in hand, watching the miniature tornado dance across the barren yard like some phantom waltz. For a moment, just a moment, he could swear he heard Martha's laugh carried on the wind. 3 years since consumption had claimed his wife, leaving him alone on their God-forsaken homestead 20 miles outside of Dry Creek, Texas. 3 years of talking to ghosts and shadows, of hearing her voice in every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the cottonwoods she'd planted by the well. The dust devil dissipated as quickly as it had formed, leaving only the endless prairie and the weight of another solitary evening ahead. Ezra shouldered his pitchfork and trudged toward the house, his boots heavy on the packed earth. At 52 he felt ancient, worn down like the weathered fence posts that barely kept his handful of cattle from wandering into the vastness. The screen door protested with a familiar squeal as he entered the kitchen. Everything remained exactly as Martha had left it. The blue gingham curtains she'd sewn from fabric ordered from the Sears catalog, the cast-iron skillet seasoned by her gentle hands, the rocking chair where she'd sat mending clothes while humming old hymns. He'd touched nothing, changed nothing, as if preserving her space might somehow preserve her memory more completely. Ezra lit the oil lamp and settled at the rough-hewn table with a plate of cold beans and yesterday's cornbread. The silence pressed against him like a physical thing, broken only by the tick of the mantel clock and the eternal sigh of wind against the shutters. He ate mechanically, tasting nothing, his mind drifting as it always did to those last days when Martha's cough had turned bloody and her blue eyes had grown distant with fever. "Talk to the wind, Ezra," she'd whispered near the end, her voice barely audible above the autumn gales that rattled the house. "When I'm gone, talk to the wind. I'll be listening." He'd dismissed it as delirium then, the ravings of a mind consumed by sickness. But in the lonely months that followed, he'd found himself stepping onto the porch in the evenings, whispering to the empty air like a man touched by madness, telling the darkness about his day, about the crops that failed, about the loneliness that ate at him like acid. Sometimes he thought he felt something listening, a presence in the restless air, but he'd always dismissed it as wishful thinking. The next morning brought the stranger. Ezra was repairing a section of fence when he spotted the figure walking along the old cattle trail that meandered past his property. At first he thought it might be a traveler heading to Dry Creek, but as the figure drew closer he realized it was a woman, and she was walking directly toward his homestead. She was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair that hung loose around her shoulders and a traveling dress that had seen better days. A small canvas satchel was slung across her body, and she moved with a peculiar grace, as if she were dancing to music only she could hear. What struck him most, though, was that she kept pausing to turn her face to the wind, her lips moving in what appeared to be conversation. Ezra straightened, hammer in hand, and watched her approach. Strangers were rare in this part of Texas, especially women traveling alone. The nearest town was a hard day's ride, and the road was known to be frequented by drifters and worse. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 holstered at his hip. The woman stopped at his gate, if the broken stretch of wire and weathered posts could be called a gate, and smiled. "Good morning," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I wonder if I might trouble you for some water. I've been walking since dawn." Ezra studied her face, searching for signs of deception or desperation. Instead he found only a peculiar serenity, as if she carried some inner calm that the harsh world couldn't touch. Her eyes were green as spring grass, startling in their clarity. "Water's free to anyone who asks," he replied, setting down his hammer. "Wells by the..." As she approached, he noticed her strange behavior continued. She would pause mid-step, cock her head as if listening, then nod and murmur something under her breath. When a particularly strong gust swept across the yard, lifting her dark hair like a banner, she actually laughed and spoke directly to it. "Thank you for the encouragement," she said to the air, her words audible in the brief lull that followed. Ezra felt his blood run cold. It was exactly the sort of thing Martha used to do, holding conversations with the wind as if it were an old friend. He'd thought it charming then, one of her many endearing eccentricities. Now, seeing it again, it felt like witnessing something else. The woman reached the well and worked the pump handle with practiced ease, filling her cupped hands and drinking deeply. Water ran down her chin and darkened the front of her dress, but she seemed unconcerned with appearance. "I'm Sage," she said, turning to face him. "Sage Brent, and you're very kind to share your water with a stranger." "Ezra Whitmore," he replied automatically, still unsettled by her behavior. "This is my land." She nodded as if this weren't news to her. "I know, I've been told about you." "Told by who?" "There ain't nobody for my—" Sage glanced toward the cottonwoods, where the wind was making the leaves dance and whisper. "Oh, there are more listeners than you might think, Mr. Whitmore." A chill ran down Ezra's spine despite the warming day. "You're not from around here." "No," she agreed. "I come from a place where the wind carries messages across great distances, where people understand that the earth speaks to those willing to listen." She paused, studying his weathered face. "Your wife understood this." The words hit him like a physical blow. "How could you possibly know about Martha?" "Because she's been calling to me," Sage said simply. "In the wind, in the rustle of leaves, in the song of the grass. She's worried about you, Mr. Whitmore. She says you've forgotten how to live." Ezra staggered backward, his face draining of color. "That's impossible. Martha's dead, has been for 3 years. Death doesn't always mean silence," Sage replied gently. "Sometimes love is stronger than the grave. Sometimes the wind carries more than weather." For a long moment they stood facing each other across the dusty yard, the grieving widower and the strange young woman who claimed to hear voices in the air. The wind picked up, setting the windmill to creaking and sending tumbleweeds skittering across the open ground. "You're mad," Ezra whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Perhaps," Sage acknowledged. "Or perhaps the world is larger and stranger than most people dare to believe." She shouldered her satchel and turned to go. "Thank you for the water, Mr. Whitmore." "Wait," he called, surprising himself. Something in her manner, in the way she'd spoken of Martha, had shaken loose a desperate hope he'd thought long buried. "Where are you going?" "West," she said. "Always west, following the wind. It'll be dark soon. The road's not safe for a woman alone." Sage smiled, and for an instant, Ezra could swear he saw Martha's expression flickering across her features. "The wind will protect me. It always has." She was nearly to the gate when the dust devil formed again, right in her path. Instead of stepping around it, she walked directly into the swirling column of dust and debris. Ezra watched in amazement as she spread her arms wide and began to spin with it, laughing with pure joy. She spoke to it as if greeting an old friend, her words lost in the whirring wind but her meaning clear in every gesture. The dust devil collapsed as suddenly as it had formed, leaving Sage standing unharmed in its wake. She turned back to Ezra with a radiant smile. "She says hello," Sage called. "She says she misses your morning coffee and the way you sang while you shaved." Ezra's knees nearly buckled. Martha had been the only person who'd ever heard him sing those old war songs while he scraped whiskers from his jaw. He'd never mentioned it to another living soul. "Stay," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, just for tonight." Sage studied him for a long moment, her head tilted as if listening to voices he couldn't hear. Finally she nodded. "The wind says it's time I rested. If you're certain you don't mind the company of a strange woman." "I don't mind," Ezra said quickly. "There's a spare room. Was going to be." He stopped himself before he could say "for children." Some hopes were too painful to voice, even now. That evening, as Sage helped him prepare a simple supper of salt pork and beans, Ezra found himself watching her every movement. She moved through Martha's kitchen with eerie familiarity, reaching for the coffee tin without being told where it was kept, selecting the proper skillet from among the 3 hanging by the stove. When she hummed while working, it was the same tune Martha had favored, an old hymn about being gathered to Jesus. "How do you know this place?" he asked finally. "I see it in the wind," Sage replied, not looking up from the cornbread she was mixing. "Memory lingers in the air, especially strong memories made with love. This house is full of such memories." As if to emphasize her point, a gust rattled the shutters, and Sage paused in her stirring to nod toward the window. "She wants me to tell you about the Christmas morning when you gave her the blue dress, how she cried because she'd never owned anything so beautiful." Ezra sank into his chair, overwhelmed. The blue dress had been a surprise, ordered from a shop in Austin and shipped by train to dry. Martha had indeed cried when she'd unwrapped it, tears of joy streaming down her face as she'd held the soft fabric against her cheek. "How?" he whispered. "Love leaves echoes," Sage said softly. "And some people, like your Martha, like myself, were born with the ability to hear them." She resumed her stirring, but her voice grew distant. I wasn't always a wanderer, Mr. Whitmore. Once I had a home, a family, but people fear what they don't understand. When the townspeople decided I was a witch, I had to leave. I've been following the wind ever since, listening to its stories, carrying messages between the living and the dead. Messages. Comfort, mostly. Reassurance. The wind carries the last words of the dying, the love of mothers for children, the regrets of those who passed without saying goodbye. She looked up at him with those startling green eyes. Martha has so many things she wants you to know. Over the following days, Sage settled into the rhythm of the homestead, as if she'd always belonged there. She helped with the chores, tended the small vegetable garden Martha had planted, and spent long hours sitting in the cottonwoods apparently deep in conversation with the air itself. Ezra found himself drawn to these sessions, lingering nearby as he worked, straining to catch fragments of her one-sided dialogue. He began to notice patterns in the wind's behavior when Sage was present, how it seemed to swirl around her with deliberate purpose, how it would gust at specific moments as if responding to her word. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sage turned to him with a solemn expression. "She wants me to show you something," Sage led him to the old oak tree behind the house, its gnarled branches reaching toward the darkening sky like arthritic fingers. Martha had loved this tree, often sitting in its shade with her sewing or reading aloud from the Bible. At its base, almost hidden by tall grass, was a small wooden cross Ezra had carved to mark the grave of their stillborn son, the child they'd lost in Martha's 7th month. The loss that had broken something fundamental in both their hearts. "She comes here often," Sage said softly, "to be close to both of you." As if summoned by her words, the wind began to move through the oak's branches with unusual intensity, creating a sound almost like voices, a low, keening song that raised the hair on Ezra's arms. "Listen," Sage whispered, placing her hand on the rough bar. "Really listen." Ezra strained his ears, and gradually, impossibly, he began to distinguish something that might have been words in the wind's voice, a familiar rhythm, a beloved cadence that he'd heard every day for 15 years of marriage. The sound was so faint he might have imagined it, but it was followed by another gust that seemed to carry the echo of Martha's laughter. "She's been trying to reach you for so long," Sage said, tears streaming down her face. "She says she never left." "Not really. She's been here all along, watching over you, trying to comfort you in your grief." Ezra fell to his knees beside the tiny grave, his body shaking with suppressed sobs. "Martha, is it really you?" The wind intensified, wrapping around him like an embrace, and for one impossible moment, he could swear he felt familiar arms holding him close. The air filled with the scent of the lavender soap Martha had always used, a fragrance that had faded from the house months ago. "Tell her," Sage urged. "Tell her what you've been holding inside." The words poured out of him then, 3 years of guilt and regret, and desperate loneliness. He told the wind about the nights he'd lain awake, blaming himself for not being able to save her, about the way he'd stopped caring for himself after she died, about the terrible fear that he was losing her memory a little more each day. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I let myself become this broken thing. I don't know how to live without you." The wind gentled, becoming a soft caress against his tear-streaked face. Sage knelt beside him, her voice serving as translator for the whispered conversation. "She says there's nothing to forgive. She says grief is just love with nowhere to go, but love never truly dies. She wants you to start living again, really living, not just existing." Sage paused, listening to something only she could hear. "She says she'll always be part of the wind, part of the sky, part of everything beautiful in this world, and she'll be waiting when your time comes, but not for a long while yet." As the night deepened and the first stars appeared overhead, Ezra felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the band of grief that had constricted his heart for so long. He looked up at Sage, this strange woman who'd appeared from nowhere to deliver a message he desperately needed to hear. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you come here? Why did you help me?" Sage smiled, brushing tears from her own cheeks. "Because the wind asked me to, because love called to love, and because everyone deserves to know they haven't been forgotten." Over the weeks that followed, Sage continued to stay at the homestead, and Ezra found himself coming back to life in ways he'd thought impossible. He began taking care of himself again, shaving regularly, cooking proper meals, mending clothes that had grown ragged through neglect. He started singing again while he worked, old songs Martha had loved, and sometimes he could swear he heard her humming along on the breeze. Sage proved to be a gifted healer in ways that went beyond her strange communion with the wind. She helped him repair the house, plant new crops, and slowly begin making plans for the future. She never spoke of staying permanently, but neither did she mention leaving, and Ezra found himself hoping she might remain. One morning, as they worked together in the garden, Ezra gathered his courage to ask the question that had been haunting him. What happens when you leave? Sage straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. I've been wondering the same thing. The wind has been quiet lately, as if its mission here is complete. Does that mean Martha is gone? Oh no, Sage said quickly. She'll always be here in the rustle of leaves, in the song of the grass, in every sunset that paints the sky. You don't need me to hear her anymore, you just need to remember how to listen. That evening, as they sat on the porch sharing their usual comfortable silence, a massive dust devil formed in the distance, moving slowly across the prairie toward the house. As it drew nearer, Ezra could see it was larger than any he'd witnessed before, a towering column of earth and sky that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. Sage stood and walked to meet it, her arms spread wide in welcome. The dust devil enveloped her completely, and for several terrifying moments, she disappeared within its swirling embrace. When it finally dissipated, she stood transformed, her hair whipped wild around her face, her eyes shining with an otherworldly radiance. It's time, she said simply. The wind is calling me west again. There are others who need what I can offer. Ezra felt his heart sink, but he also understood. Sage was like the wind itself, beautiful, mysterious, and impossible to hold. She belonged to the wide world, not to any one place or person. Will I see you again? Perhaps, she said. The wind blows in circles sometimes, but you don't need me anymore. Ezra, you know how to listen now. You know how to live. She gathered her few belongings and kissed his cheek gently. Take care of yourself. Be happy. Martha wants you to be happy. As she walked away toward the western horizon, Ezra stood watching until she became a distant speck against the vast sky. Then he closed his eyes and listened to the wind with new ears, and there, faint but unmistakable, he heard Martha's voice carried on the evening breeze. Thank you, she seemed to whisper. Thank you for letting her help you find your way back to life. Years later, when travelers passed through and asked about the strange woman who was said to talk to the wind, Ezra would smile and tell them she was a messenger, a bridge between worlds, a healer of hearts broken by love. Some believed him, and some dismissed the story as the fanciful tale of an old man touched by too much solitude. But on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the cottonwoods with particular grace, Ezra would sit on his porch and listen to the voices it carried, Martha's love, Sage's wisdom, and the eternal conversation between earth and sky that connected all living things. And sometimes, just sometimes, he would catch a glimpse of a figure walking the distant prairie, arms spread wide to embrace the wind, still carrying messages of love and hope to those who needed them most. The wind, after all, never truly stops blowing, and love, once given, never truly dies.